Hello, my name's Kevin Simmons. I am the founder of Blue Cube Aerospace, and I lead two groups of students in Florida in the United States uh, who build small satellites known as CubeSats. Thank you for attending my talk today, and I'd like to share about the first 5 years of the Wolverine CubeSat development team. So first of all, what is a CubeSat? A CubeSat is the most disruptive uh, learning and teaching tool that I've seen in engineering. When I first saw them, probably 12 years ago, I thought this is how you can disrupt the way that you train small teams, and especially in engineering and aerospace. So what is a CubeSat? It is a small satellite form factor. They perform all functions that a large satellite would, except of course for environmental control and life support. They are based on a form factor of 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters and 1.33 kilograms maximum mass. Now you can have units of these that are twice as long or 3 times as long. And in fact, the one that you see on the image here is a 1U, but some of the most prevalent CubeSats launched are 3Us, which are about the size of a loaf of bread. The advantage of the CubeSat is that it has a standardized form factor. Everyone knows what the precise dimensions and characteristics and the power, weight, and mass requirements are for a CubeSat. They use a lot of commercial off-the-shelf electronic and structural components. And the origin story for this is really quite fascinating. Bob Twiggs was a professor at Stanford University, and he literally held up a Beanie Baby box and said, I wonder what we could do with this. Because the larger a satellite, the more things people try to cram into them, more capabilities. So what he decided was, if we have the smallest satellite possible, we will limit the functionality, but it will definitely, we de-scoped it until we can get the job done in the time that a student is in, say, graduate school, where they could design, build, test, and fly a satellite in those 4 years. Very disruptive. So early on, I believe the first ones flew around 2003. And by the time that my students flew in 2018, almost 20 years later, what had been something very novel that only the best universities were engaging in is now common practice with all really well-known engineering universities, the military, industries, and in fact, some nations, their very first entry into space is a CubeSat. So I employ a blue sky learning philosophy, which is, let's take the most ridiculous task that we should not be able to accomplish. Let's break it into incremental deliverables, and then let's go out and do it. So this is a photograph of one of the first team meetings, and you can see that these are just kids in middle school. Those were 6th and 7th graders in that photo. But we purposed to design, build, and test and fly that satellite in 3 years, and we actually did accomplish it in 39 months. So we went from 0 to space in 39 months. What's the value of blue sky learning? Really, we're talking about developing human capital. How do we engage and train the next generation of scientists and engineers? And another of the advantages of what we found through this CubeSat team is that there's a lot of creativity and teamwork, but what we're really talking about are the techies and the talkies. I have, in America, we have the joke that the world's worst communicators are engineers. They're just terrible communicators on their own. But the way that the CubeSat is, the way that it took 2 years, 2 or 3 years for a mission to unfold, you have all these opportunities to present your work and share, just as we are today. There's a number of students that were selected for the COSPAR conference, and they're presenting their papers as well. And some of them have to do with these CubeSats as well. So being able to effectively persuade and communicate what we call the talkies is just as important on our CubeSat teams as the techies. So together, they're a powerful combination. And you'll see we call on Congress, we interact at the White House and with our legislators quite often. And we collectively call this group the techies and the talkies. So some theory real quickly, just in short, I like to employ the I mean, the growth mindset is the way to go, where we don't want students to have a fixed mindset that if they're not good at something, then they should just ignore that path in their life. Uh, we actually talk about failing fast and failing often and learning from our mistakes. And aerospace, going to space is hard. And so we're not supposed to be able to do it as 12-year-olds. The kids aren't, but we are. It's not that you're fearless, it's just that you embrace the moment that you're in and you understand that failure is very possible, but you just learn from it and then you move on. So it's a very entrepreneurial, startup entrepreneurial kind of mindset. I also strongly believe in co-opetition, which is a combination of cooperation and competition. So there are times in this process where students are competing against one another for some resources, and then there are other times that they are collaborating. One quick example of that is when I let the students pitch ideas for the NASA cycle for applying to NASA to fly our satellites. I throw it open and whoever wants to throw out an idea can, and the best ideas bubble to the top. And whichever student is chosen becomes the student lead or the co-investigator for that NASA proposal. And as a result, everyone else just jumps on those teams. So whichever ideas are chosen, everybody else, instead of now they were competing for that opportunity, now we're all members of the same team. So co-opetition, it's really, it's very useful because along the lines with game theory, gamifying learning activities is a great way to keep the students engaged. Having been a coach of volleyball teams for decades, I find that a team that feels external pressure will often come together, and competition is a great vehicle to get some great work and great learning from the students. Okay, how do we go about building this CubeSat team? Started originally with 9 students. You already have heard the mission to design, build, test, and fly CubeSat in 3 years. The first thing I did is I took the students to the University of Florida to see an undergraduate small satellite design club, because they were literally doing what we wanted to do. And I needed to find a way to take the best of what was happening at the university level and make it work for younger kids. So here's the process. We early on, we used some Raspberry Pis, and the students would 3D print some standard CubeSat chassis. What's nice about that is you can just go to CubeSat.org and download the standards and print your own. It's a great way, a low-cost way for teachers to get into the aerospace sort of mindset. And then we did a series of tethered balloons. So we put a small camera and a Wi-Fi dongle on the Raspberry Pi inside the emulator, and the students would connect via Wi-Fi to the balloon payload and send photos down and whatnot. And the kids seemed to really enjoy the balloons. We then moved on to high altitude balloons using a radio that talked to the Global Star Network. And that was very strategic because the Global Star Network, the radios that employ the Global Star Network were our choice for our first satellite, because I was concerned that if we did not use Global Star, then I would have to build a ground station, and then we'd always be worried about, are we getting the data and losing packets of data. So we went from emulators to tethered balloon missions to high altitude balloon. You can see we had a live 900 megahertz video camera that we obviously had to have direct line of sight. And then our telemetry packets came down to the ground through Global Star. So the kids always love high altitude balloon days. They get really excited. And then as long as you share the login to the dashboard, the students can download every byte of the data from your payload as a comma separated variable spreadsheet or CSV, and then they can analyze the data. So ascent rate, for instance, when do you hit the jet stream, and how far downrange are you, and what is the external temperature? Those things are very interesting to the kids, and it's a real world hands-on experiment. So from there, we applied to NASA's CubeSat launch initiative with our first satellite known as the name of it was the WhiteSat, and its purpose was to investigate extremophile bacteria. So we had read a paper that these ice cores had located some bacteria that had been dormant for 30,000 years, and they were, revitalized. And the thinking was, we read a paper about dirty comets. So these astrobiologists said, hey, what if we have a dirty comet and there's extremophile life forms on it, and the comet is out there seeding planets in a solar system, for instance. So that was the basis of the experiment. So we applied in the fall of 2016, and we were selected in the spring of 2017 in the 8th round of the CubeSat launch initiative. This program is sponsored by NASA through the Educational Launch of Nanosatellites, or ALANA, and the program essentially says if you can prove that you can build and test a satellite and it's of interest, that the payload is of some interest to NASA, or it meets some of the NASA strategic goals, then they will pay for your integration and the flight. So that's how we were able to afford to do it. Real quickly, we used 2 microcontrollers. We had one in the payload and one in the bus. And of course, we used the hexadecimal format. So if you enjoyed the movie The Martian, that's a great way to introduce hexadecimal code to the kids. And then of course, the data was sent. We sent the packets redundantly. We'd send it at least twice each packet through Globalstar to make sure we wouldn't lose the data. The photo in the bottom of the 2 young ladies, you can see that's a high fidelity engineering unit, which allows you to conduct tests on the ground on your payload. Here is the payload. We used a live dead stain. So basically we had lyophilized bacteria. We flew it as a powder. Once we got on orbit, we hydrated it, because you don't know how long you're going to be waiting until your satellite gets loaded. And when you have live payloads or something that requires special attention, that's called a late load. And that's always more difficult to pull off than being able to hand off your satellite at integration and let it sit on a shelf for 90 days until NASA's ready to launch it. So we launched this lyophilized bacteria, we hydrated it, and then we used the live dead stain. And we got very little data on the payload, and that was a hard lesson that we learned because we did not do enough testing of the hardware before we had to integrate. And this, of course, some of these pictures represent some of the best memories that the students have about, we went to Seattle to integrate. NASA assigned us the company Spaceflight Industries, and they had a clean room and a clean tent just outside of Seattle. So I took the students that had worked the hardest, and they went through a procedure where we did a handoff, and then we integrated our CubeSat into a deployer, and we were in a tube with a 2U CubeSat from Spain. So it was just a tremendous opportunity. Finally, after numerous delays, it launched on December 3rd, and it was deployed into a sun synchronous orbit. It's an inclination of 97 degrees. And we received data for the next 16 months, about 200,000 bytes. So here you can see some representative dashboards from the data from our CubeSat. Just, obviously, if you're at this point, it's more fun than work. This is a lot of fun. So the kids were so excited that we had, I think, 6 proposals the next year for NASA. And one of those was selected again. So we were the only K-12 entity in the US selected in 2019. And that mission is called the Capsat. And we're looking at a novel way to power satellites on orbit. So capacitors, if this were possible, you fly a dead satellite. It's not energized at all. Once it gets on orbit and gets deployed, the solar panels start charging the system, and then it comes to life. So this is a 7th grader's idea, so he's the co-I on the proposal. We use the NASA sort of engineering cycle for this. We use a number of phases. You can see from phase A through the retirement and phase F. And we decided we would take at least 2 full years to go from the time we were chosen until the flight, till the handoff. And of course, the COVID pandemic has slowed us down some there. I have some high school students now that really want to take this CubeSat knowledge and turn it into a lunar rover, which, believe it or not, other companies are already doing. And this would be our Ameris Lunar Rover program. And this would be a great, this would be this is like a much more difficult mission than CubeSat. It's also about 10 times more expensive, but that's where we're reaching for now. So once the COVID hit, I recognized that NASA was probably not going to pick me for a third time unless I had something unique. So what I looked at was that NASA wants to fly a CubeSat from all 50 states, but they haven't flown one from Nebraska and North Carolina yet. They've flown them from about 41 states. So I reached out to my friends and contacts in North Carolina at a high school out in the country, very sort of rural and poor high school a system. And I established some contacts there. And then a gentleman from Nebraska contacted me because he had met some of my students in Michigan the year before. And so we just started building the Wolf Pack. So the Wolf Pack is actually 3 groups of students from 3 states, from North Carolina, from Nebraska, and from Florida. And we are submitting all together our own unique proposals this fall. But our secondary mission, we have our own unique primary missions, but our secondary mission is we're going to trade some data packets with a second radio that we're flying. And so we'll send down a little bit of data from each other. We do a lot of space settlement design competitions as well. Our students have been both national and international champs in different competitions. We actually traveled to Beijing to represent the United States in 2019, and we enjoy that very much. So I highly recommend to the educators out there. The Future Space Scholars Meet is supposed to rotate between London, Beijing, and the US. And every year, my students enjoy the National Space Society Space Settlement Contest. So what have we done? The students have been, I think, very much engaged. These posters are actually part of a university competition. So these are high school, middle school kids building these posters to share their work and then compete at the SmallSat conference in Utah every year. And then finally, this June, we submitted our final report to NASA, where our satellite, that mission has now ended. We had at least 31 student and teacher papers at conferences, just such as COSPAR and IAC and the ISDC, just a number of just ridiculous opportunities. So I'm very proud of the students and the work that we did over the 3 years. Because we do a lot of aerospace activities, I actually created this chart. Actually shows a number of these aerospace type contests, activities, explorations, and I've sorted it by the rigor and the complexity and the age of the student. So what we find interesting is that there's a lot of things that are not too difficult for the students and for younger kids, but these CubeSats really move it into the upper right quadrant of this graph, because this is real world, real engineering. I also started a science fair program, and there are a lot of students that did a lot of their science fair that were somehow related to aerospace or our CubeSats. And you can see, I think, the pattern of before we introduced the blue sky learning, we had 1 student in our entire school at the regional level or state level. And then in the last 5 years, you can see this, of course, is because of the COVID pandemic. But you can see that there's a lot of success with the students. So these young people actually don't know why they can't build a satellite. So if you will build a network of folks that can help you, that know more than you do about aerospace, and just ask questions, I find that this community is very willing to help you. And then just set a blue sky goal. Maybe your goal is to fly suborbital or to fly high altitude balloons. Very reasonable, very cost effective. Again, the enthusiasm, the inspiration value of going to space, that's our sort of our tagline, let's go to space. Now it's let's go to space again. My colleague and I, who's also making a talk here at COSPAR, she and I, we put out our first book together, and it's literally the title is Let's Go to Space, and it's all about building a CubeSat team. So this is my colleague and I, Shauna Christensen. That's her email. That's my email and my phone number. I look forward to interacting with you, and I wish you the best, and let's go to space. Thank you for your time.